My real estate agent told me to sign the disclosure form. I almost did. But then I remembered the manometer on my basement wall, that little liquid gauge that hadn't moved in 6 months. So I asked one question: when was the last radon test done on this house? The agent laughed. The seller turned pale. And 3 days later, I found a document hidden in the county recorder's office that made my blood run colder than any basement floor. October came to Minnesota like it always does: quiet, cold, and unforgiving. My daughter Emma started getting sick somewhere between the first frost and Halloween. Not the flu, not a cold, just tired. She would come home from soccer practice and sleep until the next morning. I told her to drink more water. I told her to go to bed earlier. I told myself it was nothing. Then the nosebleeds started. I stood in the doorway of her bedroom, holding a roll of paper towels, watching the blood drip onto her white comforter. She looked up at me with those eyes, half scared, half annoyed. "It's fine, Dad," she said. "Probably just the dry air." I wanted to believe that. I'm a contractor. I build decks and renovate basements in suburban Minneapolis. I know drywall, lumber, and concrete, but I don't know blood, so I nodded. I handed her the towels. I went back to fixing the leaky faucet in the guest bathroom. That was my job: fix what breaks, don't ask why it broke. The house went quiet that night. The furnace kicked on, that low hum I've heard for 15 years. I sat in the garage looking at my tools: Milwaukee drills, Stanley levels, a circular saw that outlasted my first marriage. I thought about the list my wife Laura left on the fridge that morning: call the doctor, get the gutters, pick up Emma's prescription. How are you? Not "I love you," just a list. Like I was the handyman who happened to sleep in the master bedroom. The irony: I didn't even build this house. We bought it in 2009 after the crash, when foreclosures were everywhere. The previous owner had already finished the basement. I just painted a few walls and called it home. But now, standing in that garage, I realized I had never really looked under the surface. Not the drywall, not the slab, not the soil. The next morning I took Emma to the ER. The doctors ran tests: blood work, chest x-ray, the works. They came back with frowns and medical jargon. Idiopathic pulmonary hemosiderosis, one said, a fancy way of saying your daughter's lungs are bleeding and we have no idea why. I stood in the hallway holding Emma's jacket. A young nurse walked by. She glanced at my hands: the calluses, the cracked knuckles, the splinters. She stopped. She said quietly, "Do you live in an older home?" "Built in '92, I said. She nodded. "Have you ever tested for radon?" I almost laughed. "Radon? That's something you hear about in a commercial during the morning news. You don't actually think about it." "We don't have a basement," I said. "Just a slab." Nurse didn't laugh. She looked at Emma through the glass door, then back at me. "Radon comes from the soil. It seeps through cracks in the slab. You don't need a basement, you just need a crack." And Minnesota has some of the highest radon levels in the country. The EPA says 1 in 3 homes here have dangerous levels. That night I didn't sleep. I went to the hardware store at 6 a.m. I bought a digital radon detector, the kind the EPA recommends, not the cheap test kits. I set it on the floor of the living room right next to the air vent. I waited. The EPA action level is 4 picocuries per liter, (PCIL). Anything above that and they recommend mitigation. The device beeped at 10:30 m, 14.2 PCIL. I stared at the screen. I tapped the glass. I thought it was broken. I took it outside to the porch. The number dropped to 0.5. I brought it back inside. 14.2 again. I moved it to Emma's bedroom right next to her bed. 18.7 PCIL. The house wasn't quiet anymore. It was screaming. I started digging, not into the soil, but into records. I opened my laptop. I went to the Minnesota Department of Health website. I learned things I wish I had known years ago. Educational break: USA radon laws. The EPA established the 4 PCIL action level in 1986, but it's not a federal mandate. Only 22 states have radon disclosure laws for home sales. Minnesota has the Minnesota Radon Licensing Act, 2015, which requires all radon measurement and mitigation professionals to be licensed, but it does not require home sellers to test for radon before listing. The Illinois Radon Awareness Act, 2008, requires sellers to provide buyers with a radon disclosure pamphlet, but testing is still optional. Wisconsin requires all schools to test for radon. Most states do not. HUD Housing and Urban Development requires radon testing for multifamily housing projects, but not for single-family homes. The American Lung Association estimates that radon causes 21,000 lung cancer deaths per year in the U.S., second only to smoking. I printed those facts and taped them to my garage wall. Then I went deeper. I found the county records for my subdivision. The original soil gas survey from 1991, buried in the appendix of a zoning permit. It was written in dense legal language, but the conclusion was simple: uranium-bearing glacial till present, radon potential high, passive ventilation recommended. Developer had installed passive pipes, cheap PVC tubes running from the gravel under the slab to the roof. No fans, no active suction, just gravity. And in 1992, the Minnesota Building Code did not require active radon mitigation systems. The code only recommended them. But here's the kicker: in 2009, when we bought the house, Minnesota law required sellers to disclose known radon test results. The previous owner had never tested, so they checked the box: no known radon issues. Legally, that was true. They didn't know because they never looked. I sat in the garage holding that useless pipe, the soil gas survey, in my lap. My daughter had been breathing 18.7 pcil for 3 years. That's like getting a chest x-ray every day. And nobody was legally responsible. The next morning I called a licensed radon mitigator, a guy named Frank. He showed up in a white truck with a vacuum gauge and a drill. He tested the pressure under the slab. He whistled low. Man, he said, you've got a stack effect chimney. Every time you turn on the furnace, you're sucking radon from the soil right into the bedrooms. This passive pipe, it's doing nothing, it's capped at the top. How long to fix it? I asked. 4 hours, he said. Sub-slab depressurization. I'll drill a hole, install a fan, run a new pipe through the roof. You'll see a manometer on the wall, a little liquid gauge. If the liquid is level, the fan is working. Cost you about 3 grand. I wrote the check. I watched Frank drill through the slab. I watched him insert the PVC pipe. I watched him seal it with polyurethane caulk, the kind that doesn't crack over time. When he turned on the fan, the manometer showed suction instantly. The house groaned once, then silence. The digital detector dropped to zero point 0.8 pcil within an hour. Emma's nosebleed stopped 3 days later. I didn't tell Laura about the documents, not yet. She doesn't need the guilt. I just told her I fixed the air. She nodded. She went back to her phone. But I couldn't let it go, because that soil gas survey wasn't just about my house, it was about the entire subdivision, and the developer who built it, he was still building, 30 miles south, a new subdivision called Willow Creek Estates. Minnesota building code had changed in 2015. New homes were now required to have passive radon-resistant features, a sealed slab, a gas-permeable layer, and a vent pipe roughed in. But no fan was required unless a post-construction test came back above 4 pcil, and the test? Optional for the builder. I knew what I had to do. The next morning I drove to Willow Creek Estates. It took 45 minutes, past cornfields, strip malls, and a brand new elementary school built right next to the development. Kids were playing on the playground. I wondered if their parents had ever seen a radon detector. The sales office was a temporary trailer parked at the entrance. A sign out front said, Willow Creek Estates, luxury living from the 400s, move in by Christmas. I parked my truck. I sat for a moment. My hands were steady. Carpentry taught me that measure twice, cut once. I had measured. Now it was time to cut. I walked in. The receptionist was young, maybe 25, blonde hair, a smile that was trained, not real. Good morning, sir. Welcome to Willow Creek. Are you looking to buy or just browsing? I placed a folder on her desk. Inside were 3 things: the 1991 soil gas survey, my daughter's hospital discharge papers, and a printout of the Minnesota Radon Licensing Act. I'm here to see the project manager or the owner, either one. Her smile flickered. I can schedule an appointment for next week. No, I said, not loud, just firm. I'll wait. She picked up the phone, whispered something. Her eyes glanced at my hands, the calluses, the cracked knuckles, the hands of a working man. She hung up. Someone will be with you shortly. I stood there for 20 minutes. Potential buyers came and went, young couples, a retired military family, a single mom with 2 kids. All of them smiling. None of them knew what was under their feet. Then the door opened. A man walked in, mid-50s, expensive shoes, a watch that cost more than my truck. His face was familiar. I'd seen it in old photographs from the county recorder's office. He was the son of the original developer, but he had changed his last name, probably for business reasons. Sir, he said, offering a handshake. I'm Brad. How can I help you? I didn't shake his hand. I opened the folder. I pulled out the 1991 soil gas survey. Do you know what this is? Brad looked at the paper. His face didn't change, but his eyes did, a tiny flicker. The kind you see when someone recognizes a ghost they thought they'd buried. That's an old document, he said. Before my time, your father's time, I said. He knew about the uranium bearing till he knew about the radon. He installed passive pipes and capped them to save $200 per house. Brad folded his arms. Think you should leave. Not leaving, I said. Not until you answer one question: how many homes has your family built on contaminated soil, and how many of them have active radon mitigation systems? The receptionist was staring. The young couple who had been looking at floor plans had stopped. They were listening. Brad leaned in close. His voice dropped to a whisper. You're making a mistake. We have lawyers. We have a team. You're just a what? I interrupted. A handyman? Yeah, that's me. But I'm also the guy who reads the fine print. And I'm the guy who keeps records. I have everything: the soil surveys, the permits, the building codes from 1992, 2005, and 2015. I pulled out a second document, a current building permit for Lot 14 of Willow Creek Estates. The permit showed a standard slab foundation. No mention of a gas-permeable layer, no mention of a vent pipe, no mention of a post-construction radon test. According to the 2015 Minnesota Residential Code, I said, new homes in high radon zones are required to have passive radon-resistant features. Section 40241. But your permit doesn't mention any of that. So I have to ask, are you building to code? Educational break: USA Radon Building Codes. The 2015 International Residential Code (IRC) includes Appendix F, which mandates passive radon-resistant construction in high radon zones, Zone 1. Minnesota adopted the 2015 IRC in 2016. However, not all states have adopted Appendix F as of 2024. Only about 20 states require radon-resistant new construction. The EPA maintains a map of radon zones: Zone 1 highest potential, Zone 2 moderate, Zone 3 low. Most of Minnesota, Iowa, North Dakota, and Pennsylvania are Zone 1. Even in states that require passive systems, An active fan is only required if a post-construction test shows radon above 4 psil. That test is often done by the homeowner years after moving in. Brad's face hardened. We follow all applicable codes. Now I'm asking you one last time, leave or I call the police. I nodded. I put the documents back in the folder. I walked toward the door, but I stopped at the threshold. I turned to the young couple. They were still watching. Before you sign anything, I said to them, ask for proof of a post-construction radon test. If they can't show you one, walk away and buy a detector. It's $20. It could save your children's lives. Then I walked out. I sat in my truck for a long time. My hands were shaking now, not from fear but from adrenaline. My phone buzzed. A text from Laura. Where are you? Emma has a follow-up appointment at 2. I didn't reply right away. I looked at the sales trailer. Through the window I could see Brad on the phone, packing, waving his hands. He was angry. Good, anger meant I had hit something real. I started the truck. But I didn't drive home. I drove to the county courthouse. Because I had one more document to find, the one that would connect Brad's new company to his father's old land. The one that would prove this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern of deliberate non-disclosure. At the courthouse, I spent 3 hours digging through property records. I found what I was looking for, a chain of title transfers that showed Brad's company had purchased the Willow Creek land from a shell corporation. That shell corporation was owned by his father, the same father who had signed the 1991 soil gas survey. I photocopied everything. Then I drove home. That night I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad. I wrote down everything I had learned about radon, about building codes, about disclosure laws. I organized it into a timeline. 1991, soil gas survey reveals high radon potential. Developer installs passive pipes but caps them. 1992, house built, no active mitigation, no disclosure to first buyer. 2009, we buy the house. Seller checks, no known radon issues because they never tested, legal but unethical. 2015, Minnesota adopts radon-resistant construction codes, but existing homes are grandfathered in. 2024, my daughter gets sick. We test. 18.7 psil, we mitigate. 2024 present, the same family is building new homes without proper radon controls. I looked at the manometer on the wall, that little liquid gauge that showed my radon fan was working. It was perfectly level. The house was safe now, but the houses at Willow Creek, the ones still under construction, they weren't safe, and the families who would buy them had no idea. I made a decision that night. It wasn't about revenge, it was about something simpler, the truth. The next morning I called a lawyer. It was Sarah. She was a real estate attorney with a small practice in St. Paul. I found her through a consumer advocacy group. She specialized in construction defects and non-disclosure cases. We met in her office, a cramped room with stacks of files and a window that faced a brick wall. She was in her 40s with gray streaks in her hair and the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many families hurt by bad builders. I laid out my documents on her desk, the soil gas survey, the hospital records, the chain of title, the building permits from Willow Creek. She read everything in silence. Then she looked up. You have a strong case, she said, but it's not straightforward. Let me explain why. Educational break, USA radon disclosure laws. Sarah pulled out a printed chart and pointed to it. Under Minnesota law Min. Stat. Section 144.496, home sellers are required to disclose known radon test results. But they are not required to test. That's the loophole. If a seller never tests, they can honestly say no known issues. Same thing under federal law. No, there is no federal radon disclosure requirement for single-family homes. The EPA only recommends testing and disclosure. HUD requires testing for multifamily housing. The VA has guidelines for veterans' loans. But for a typical home sale, it's state by state. She flipped to another page. Now Illinois has the Radon Awareness Act 2008. That requires sellers to provide buyers with a radon pamphlet, but again, no mandatory testing. Iowa has a disclosure law but no testing requirement. Only a handful of states like Florida and Oregon require radon testing for certain property transfers. What about new construction? I asked. That's different, she said. Under the 2015 International Residential Code, Appendix F, new homes in Zone 1 areas are supposed to have passive radon-resistant features. But here's the problem, not every jurisdiction enforces it. And even when they do, the post-construction test is often done by the homeowner. The builder has no legal obligation to test before selling. She tapped my Willow Creek permit. This permit was issued by a small county that doesn't have a dedicated building inspector. They rely on private third-party inspectors. And those inspectors, they work for the builder. Conflict of interest? Absolutely, but not illegal. What do? I asked. Sarah leaned back. You have two options. First, you can file a complaint with the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. They license builders and can levy fines. Second, you can sue for non-disclosure, but that only applies if you can prove Brad knew about the radon risk and deliberately hid it. She pointed to the 1991 soil gas survey. This document proves the father knew, but does it prove the son knew? That's harder. He can claim he never saw it. I thought for a moment, then I pulled out my phone. I showed Sarah the video I had secretly recorded in the sales trailer, Brad's face when I showed him the 1991 survey, the flicker of recognition, the whispered threat. Sarah smiled for the first time. That's evidence, not conclusive, but it's something. The next 2 weeks I did something I had never done before. I became an activist. I printed flyers with the EPA's radon zone map and Minnesota's disclosure laws. I went door to door in my subdivision offering free radon tests to my neighbors. Most of them said no. They didn't want to know. Ignorance is comfortable, but about a dozen said yes. I lent them my digital detector. 4 of them came back above 4 PCIL, 3 above 10. 1 above 20. I helped those families find licensed mitigators. I didn't charge a dime. I just wanted them to breathe clean air. Then I turned my attention to Willow Creek. I filed a complaint with the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry. I attached the soil gas survey, the building permits, and the video transcript. I also sent a copy to the local news station. A reporter named Deanne called me 2 days later. She worked for the investigative team at KARE 11. She wanted to do a story on radon and builder accountability. I agreed. The story aired on a Wednesday night. It showed my manometer, Emma's hospital bed, and the 1991 soil gas survey. It showed Deanne walking through Willow Creek Estates asking Brad for comment. He refused. He slammed the door. The next morning my phone exploded. Calls from neighbors, from other reporters, from families all over the state who had found dangerous radon levels in their homes. One woman from Duluth told me her son had been diagnosed with lung cancer at age 35. He had never smoked. The only risk factor was radon. I started a Facebook group, Safe Air Minnesota. Within a week it had 2,000 members. People shared test results, mitigation tips, and stories of builders who had cut corners. And then something unexpected happened. A state representative reached out. She wanted to introduce a bill, the Radon Disclosure and Testing Act, that would require all home sellers in Minnesota to provide a radon test result before closing. No more loopholes. No more "I didn't test so I don't know." I testified at the Capitol. I stood at the podium and held up my daughter's hospital bracelet. I told the committee about the nosebleeds, the 18.7 PCIL, and the 1991 soil gas survey that nobody had acted on. The bill passed the House, then the Senate. The governor signed it into law on a cold December morning. Emma sat next to me in the gallery, her lungs finally clear. Final educational note: what the new law did requires all sellers of single-family homes to conduct a radon test within 12 months prior to listing, using a licensed professional. Requires disclosure of the test result to potential buyers. Allows buyers to back out of a purchase if radon levels exceed 4 PCIL and the seller refuses to mitigate. Establishes fines for builders who fail to install radon-resistant features in new construction. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I still live in the same house. The manometer on the wall is still level. Emma is healthy now. She plays soccer, laughs at my bad jokes, and sleeps through the night without nosebleeds. Laura and I are still married. We don't talk about the dark months. Some things are better left in the past, but she knows I changed. I stopped being the handyman who just fixes things. I became the man who asked why things broke in the first place. Brad's company is still building homes, but now every new house in Willow Creek Estates has a visible radon vent pipe and a post-construction test result posted in the sales office. The county hired a full-time building inspector. The fines from the state were small, a slap on the wrist, but the publicity hurt. He lost 3 contracts. I don't check on him anymore. That's not my job. My job is to make sure the next family doesn't have to learn about radon the way I did in an emergency room holding a bloody paper towel. If you're listening to this right now, here's what I want you to do. Step 1. Buy a radon test kit. The EPA recommends short-term tests, 2-7 days for initial screening. You can get one at any hardware store or online for $15.30. Digital detectors are more expensive, $100 $200, but give real-time readings. Step 2. If your result is above 4 PCIL, hire a licensed mitigator. Cost is typically $800 to $500. That's cheaper than lung cancer. Step 3. Check your state's disclosure laws. If you're buying a home, ask for a radon test result before you sign. If the seller doesn't have one, pay for it yourself. It's worth the $150. Step 4. Share this story. Send it to a friend, post it on social media. Because most people still think radon is a joke. It's not. It's a radioactive gas that kills 21,000 Americans every year. I still have the 1991 soil gas survey. It's framed in my garage, hanging next to my circular saw. A reminder that silence can be deadly and that one person, even a handyman, can make a difference. The house is quiet now. The good kind of quiet. The kind where you know the monster is gone and the manometer on the wall, it's still level. That's how I know I won. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own boundaries, your own family, your own worth, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. Subscribe to Miss Cat Story for more true-life narratives that will make you feel, think, and maybe even change. And leave a comment. Have you ever had to set a hard boundary with someone you love? I read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, you matter even when no one is watching.